video, careers in public service. So before I start naming a bunch of different careers and showing y'all videos, I wanted to give y'all a little definition of what public service is. So to break down what public service is pretty much a service that's intended to serve all members of a community. These services should be available to everyone, regardless of their income, physical ability, mental acuity, their religion, their beliefs. So it should be available to everyone. And public service has characteristics of essentially being for the good of the public. And most services that are offered tend to be underprovided. So the way that I like to think of it, a lot of people who work within public service see themselves as public servants. So they see themselves as working for the community. I wanted to show this video.
When I think about my career, it's probably had some pretty non-traditional um, kind of pathways that, I never thought ever, even in my wildest dreams, that I would end up serving as the CFO for the sixth largest economy in the world as California's state controller. But my path to this really was honed after 35 years, almost 35 years doing work in the public finance and tax policy arena. And it was something that I started at a fairly young age because I learned at a fairly young age on a personal level that pretty much in everything that we do in life, in our personal life, in our professional lives, that money drives everything. And that certainly as I looked at being an advocate to my immigrant parents who ran a laundry and dry cleaning business on the west side of San Francisco, raising 6 kids, 5 of whom graduated from Cal, was something that really began my thought about being in public service. And that was, being part of a family who grew up in a family business. The best employees for my parents were the kids. And for me, and I love telling the story because this is becoming more and more of the common immigrant experience in California, but translating from my parents and being very good with numbers, handling all the financial transactions for their business. And as I finally like to say, just as I was minding the store for my parents' laundry and dry cleaning business, I now have the great privilege of minding the store for the great state of California. But really, it was where I learned the value of a dollar. We grew up poor, but I never knew a day when we were poor because we were rich in values. But negotiating with vendors from my parents, if I didn't get a good price on a gross of buttons or a dozen zippers, it probably meant that we weren't going to have that carton of milk in the refrigerator that week. So it meant a lot in terms of what money meant in our daily lives. But really what started my trajectory into thinking about a life in public service was being their advocate, being my parents' advocate for the Chinese American families who really didn't have anyone standing up for them before the local San Francisco school board when their children were proposed to be bused across the city as part of the school desegregation program. And being a spokesperson to them, opposing the busing program, not because we were opposed to the goals of the program, but because none of the families had a driver in the family, and should anything happen to their children, they'd have to be on public transportation well over 2 hours to get to them across the city. So it was a real hardship. Many of them had businesses of their own that they couldn't shut down during the day. And I remember testifying before the local school board at the age of 13 with exactly this statement, expressing our opposition. Went back to my seat in the auditorium, and the busing program lasted for the next 30 years. And it was going to involve my younger sister as the first class to be bused. Everything went fine with the busing program in our family, but that experience just left an impression in my mind that I stood up for someone, that I was a voice for someone. And really, throughout the rest of my time in school, being involved with student government, and then obviously looking at issues around money with the family business, and really seeing how money did truly drive everything, and that if you could be in a position to really influence the allocation of resources, how really powerful and impactful that could be. And so that was really what guided the work for the rest of my time in public service. And so being here right now is really a lifelong commitment to being sure that all voices are at the table when it comes to concerns about how resources are allocated. And as the controller today, my job is to be sure that the funds are allocated according to law, I'm the only independent auditor for the state of California. And I do believe that really what people are hungry for when they look at government is to be sure that they're being treated fairly and that there is transparency and accountability with respect to what's going on with their tax dollars. So, and really when I think about it, I don't really think about it as a career. It's really more of, the sense that, it's a service and I have something to contribute to hopefully make an impact and to make a difference in people's lives.
So I really like that video because so she is an alumni from UC Berkeley, and what stood out to me were some different things that she mentioned is her role as a public servant is being an advocate and having a voice for the community. And like she mentioned, she doesn't see her work as a career, as a job. She's doing it as a service to the public. You know, she learned everything she had to learn throughout the course of her education, and she's using that to better the lives of people in California through her role in finance. So that's just something that really stood out to me. You know, she really wants to make an impact within her community, and I felt like it was a good introduction to talking about public service. So public service has their own sectors, and then within those sectors, there are different jobs. So here are just a whole list of different sectors within public service. Some that I checked off, for example, the courts, education, healthcare, are some things that we have already mentioned or that we will mention. And so I'm not going to go over every single one of these sectors because we'd be here for like a really, really, really long time. So I'm just going to cut it down to just a couple that I thought were really cool. So first, electricity. So what are we using right now? Electricity. So we use electricity in everything that we do pretty much every single day. So within electricity, there are a couple different careers that you could go into. For example, there's a line installer, repair, electrical engineer, and construction manager. So for an electrical engineer, what do they do? So again, this goes into like the engineering part of our STEAM workshops that we did. But they design new products and enhance the ones that we already use to improve our electrical equipment and make sure that everything is safe. There's also construction managers who oversee a whole bunch of different projects from budgeting to making sure that installations are done properly, because if an electrical system is not done correctly, there a fire can start, and then I know the past couple like year or 2 or 3 years, there's been a whole bunch of fires that have really affected a lot of people. And some of them were electrical fires. They started off as electrical fires. So those are just some people who oversee electricity. There's also water and waste. So again, these are two other careers that you probably oversee. So water, in the mornings we wake up, we brush our teeth, we use water to shower, we use water to drink. Hayward and like the East Bay, we have really, really good water. I don't know if y'all have traveled to SoCal or more up north in Northern California or to another state, but if you try their water, it is not as good compared to the water that we have here, as well as waste. So, we throw a bunch of stuff in the trash, and we usually just, throw it in a trash bin, and then it just disappears, and we just bring back our trash bins, and that's it. However, there's a lot that goes into it. For example, for water, there are water operators. So they're responsible for the efficient operation and routine maintenance of water treatment plants, making sure that the water that we use is safe. And in order to become a water operator, you have to have a certain certification, and they make pretty good money. They make about $93,000. And a water resources planner provides technical support to the planning of different projects for water resources and energy management. They require a bachelor's, however, a master's is preferred, and they make about $101,000. And for waste, there's waste management experts as well as logistics route managers. So if you ever wonder, like maybe you see a waste management truck going by on your street, and then you like drive around the corner and then there's another one, and you're like, why wouldn't that same one just like take this whole area? So there's logic behind it, and the logistics slash route managers are the ones who come up with the routes for different routes for the waste management to take, and they require an associate's or a bachelor's, and they make about $65,000. And next, I'm going to go a little bit into emergency services. So I'll start off on the right-hand side. So we have a emergency preparedness / management specialist. So have you ever thought about like what you would do? I know we live like on the San Andreas Fault, the Hayward Fault line. I live like right on top of the Hayward Fault line. So there's always that like thought in the back of your head of there being an earthquake anytime at any moment. So like, do you have a plan prepared within your household? If you don't, you probably should make one. However, these are the people who come up with plans for the whole for an entire city, maybe just a certain company. So for example, like Tesla, they have their own emergency preparedness person. In case of an emergency while people are at work, what are they going to do? So they come up with the plans, exit routes. I know at your schools, you know, you go through this all the time. Whenever there's an earthquake, what do you do? If there's a fire, what do you do? Like, what route do you take? So those are the people who are in charge of an entire city or a specific organization to come up with plans in case there's an emergency. If you would like to go into that, a bachelor's is required, and they make about $59,000. So a geographer kind of goes into that same field as well. So you might think geography is just like, oh, the capital of this state is this, or this is where this continent is located. So it's not just that. It's not the same as what you learned in like 5th grade. So what they do is they can help to study natural hazards. So they really try to identify where something is going to happen, if an earthquake is going to happen here, if there's a flooding, maybe when is the flooding going to happen. Next up, we have a emergency medical dispatcher. So I know this goes a little bit along like the healthcare, but this isn't something that I mentioned in the healthcare workshop, but they are a really, really, really important source, you know, for emergencies. Whenever you have an emergency, like who do you think to call? You know, the number one number everyone knows to call is 911. They answer any emergency, non-emergency calls that they receive. They get urgent calls and they know who to contact for what, you know. So if it's a medical emergency, they'll make sure to contact either firefighters or paramedics. If, you know, someone's breaking into your home, they will probably call the police department and stay with you on the line. Next, we have police, and you probably just think of a police officer as like someone like patrolling the streets or like making traffic stops, you know, giving people speeding tickets. However, I wanted to go over different specialisms that you can have within a police department. So different units that are within a police department, for example, that I found really cool was underwater search units. So what they do is they help investigate crimes and search for missing people who they believe might be underwater for some reason. They also have a canine unit, a drug squad, a fraud investigations unit, and depending on different locations, you might need an associate's, a bachelor's, or just a certain amount of post-secondary units of college units. And they make about 63,000. However, it really depends on what you specialize in. Here's a video of a 911 dispatcher and kind of what they do.
So this is our dispatch console in our center here. We have 4 of them. They are identical. They all do the same thing. The big monitor that you see in front of you is our CAD, which stands for Computer Aided Dispatch. Okay. The one to your right is our telephone. It's not your average telephone because it needs to be able to handle multiple calls for service that come into us, both emergency and non-emergency. To our left, on the bottom, we have our radio. As you see, every one of those boxes is a radio channel. Okay. So those are all the different channels that we have to listen to and monitor and potentially talk on or answer a call for service on. And then we also keep track of all of the door alarms in both of the cities that we dispatch for, Edina and Richfield.
And we also, so we dispatch for Richfield Police, Richfield Fire, our own police and fire. Anybody else that we
have? Edina has medics, so we have our own ambulance service that we do all the pre-arrival information and instruction for.
I don't know if I'm capable of learning a little bit of this, but can you teach me how to do it?
Absolutely, I'd love to show you.
All right, so I think I'm ready to do this.
Okay.
So let's do it. Show me what I need to do.
Okay, well, I think because Edina is a very big traffic enforcement city, we could just wait for a traffic staff to come in. I think that would be a great thing for you.
And we won't have to wait long, probably.
Probably not.
All right, let's go. So So when I have a call, Crystal, how do I know what's going to happen?
The officer is going to give you her call sign, and then she's going to say traffic, which means she's getting ready to make a traffic stop.
194.
You can type in her number.
Southbound York at the Service Road to Cup Foods 009.
You're going to say Southbound York at the Service Road to Cup Foods at 10:45.
Southbound York
at the Service Road to Cup Foods at 10:45.
Morning. You got everything ready for me?
All right. So now we're going to type in our location.
All right. How do we do
In
that?
your location,
All right.
you can type in York.
York.
Yep.
You got to be a good typist.
And do a slash, backslash,
Slash.
and you can say 69. Because that's about where she is.
9. Got it.
And you can click OK.
Click OK. Enter.
You want to click on OK on the bottom.
Oh wait. Okay.
There you
All
go.
right.
Just watch your speed. Drive safe.
So now she's actually cleared herself.
Okay,
So we're done.
That means cleared means she's done.
She's done.
I'm 194. I'm code 4.
194.
You're code 4.
At
So I don't know about y'all, but I didn't even know that they had to do all of this like with any traffic stop. But being a emergency dispatcher is one of, if not the most important careers within emergency services. So next up, we have a health educator. So if you also want to, go into the health fields, but you're not really drawn to the blood and the needles, you can be a health educator. So what they do is they teach people how to incorporate positive and healthy habits in their life. They cover environmental health, physical health, social, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual health, as well as sexual and reproductive health. And they teach this not just to children, but to everyone at all times, at different stages in their life. And you need at least a bachelor's to become a health educator, and they make about $72,000. So next up, we have environmental protection. So if you're someone who is really into the environment, you want to save the trees, you want to save the turtles, then these might be some careers you want to look into. So first we have a forester or conservation scientist. So what they do is they manage the overall land quality of forests, parks, other natural resources. And what they do is pretty much do their best to protect those areas and enhance them for the animals who already inhabit those areas. And it's required to have a bachelor's degree, and they make about $60,000 if you want to become a wildlife biologist. So what they do is they study animals and their behavior to see how they interact with the nature. For entry-level jobs, you probably only need a bachelor's degree. However, eventually you will need a master's if you want to pursue a career within wildlife biology, and they make about $60,000 average. So every amount that I've been saying for salary is average, and it's usually entry level. So if you have more experience, then you'll probably be making more than what I'm mentioning. So next up, we have urban planning, or becoming an urban planner. So what urban planners do is they pretty much develop different plans to create, expand, or revitalize communities, and they take into account the economics, the social and environmental issues within a certain area. It's required to have a bachelor's with a lot of experience. However, a master's is preferred, and they make about $65,000. So I have a video to show next that highlights a little bit about what urban planning is.
Here to help. So what is urban planning? There is a specific professional field known as planning. You can get a degree in planning and then get hired to a job as a planner. Planners can get professionally certified and earn a graduate degree in planning. Professional planners spend their days writing and implementing plans. So let's say that one of the definitions of planning is work done by planners, but that's obviously a bit too simplistic. All of these varieties of planning have one thing in common: preparing for the future. Other professions do it too, but preparing for the future is the primary motivation of urban planners. How will people get around in the future? Where will people live and work in the future? How will all of the systems required to support those people, electrical grids, sewers, and the water supply, fit into the city? These are all questions that planners are working to answer using tools and policies specific to the field of planning. The numerous considerations raised by those questions again reintroduce the possibility of architects, engineers, and politicians doing some of the planning. So where does urban planning fit in all these different kinds of planning? The complexity of planning for the future creates a need for an intermediary between different communities and related professional fields. And their fundamental intersectionality is one of the ways that urban planners distinguish themselves from these other professions. You'll often hear planners say that they are professional generalists or that they wear many hats. Planners are like a Swiss Army knife in the city building process, which is another reason planners are sometimes confused with engineers, architects, or politicians. Given their flexibility, another one of the most important roles for planners is engaging with the public. Planning for the future in today's complex world means addressing the hopes and ambitions of a diverse collection of humans. Workers of all varieties, residents who live in all sorts of homes and in all kinds of household arrangements, and communities and cultures originating from all over the world. Planners are the first to gather feedback from the public to inform a comprehensive vision of the future. The next step in the planning process is synthesizing all that information and communicating a vision of the future for approval by a governing body, like a city council or a county board of supervisors. The approval process can be intensely political, so planning is also fundamentally political. In many cities, planners will also manage the implementation of that approved vision by enforcing the legal tools of planning, usually known as zoning codes. There is a clear distinction between the process of planning for a city's future and the process of implementing that vision. But planners will be involved in both to ensure the city evolves as planned. After zoning codes gained popularity in the early 20th century, planners began to focus almost entirely on land use, and planning began to mean the process of deciding where to locate residential, office, retail, and industrial uses in new and existing cities. The desire to separate residential uses from noxious industrial uses, enabled by the mass production of the automobile and a massive government program to build interstate highways, represents a significant step toward creating the mostly suburban and sprawling country we live in today. In the 21st century, planning is much more grassroots in orientation, inspired by the writings of Jane Jacobs, among others, and enshrined in legal and political tools designed to protect the interests and values of local residents, businesses, and communities. The term urban planning, rather than city planning, has become more popular as the public has taken a renewed interest in cities, and as the environmental and economic consequences of the 20th century model of planning have become apparent. To this day, numerous debates contest the future of urban planning, and planning continues to evolve as a result. Big questions will determine the kinds of values embedded in contemporary plans, like how to address climate change and housing affordability, how to overcome a long history of racist and discriminatory regulatory practices, and how much planners should regulate the form of buildings, not just the use of land. The answers to those questions will shape the world of the mid and long-term future. So what are your plans?
So when I started looking a little bit more into urban planning, what I found really interesting, so urban planning isn't just, where am I going to put a bus stop? Where am I going to put this road? Where are houses going to be allowed? Where are they not going to be allowed? I started to think about its relationship with, like they mentioned, housing affordability and even gentrification. I know out here in the East Bay, gentrification is something that our communities have really been dealing with for, the past number of years and are continuing to have to deal with. So if you are someone in your community who, you want to do something to better your community, then urban planning might be something that you can go into if, you feel like, oh, like growing up, I feel like we could have used, a safe place, maybe, a community park, a community garden, and instead of, these these buildings that they're building where rent is like 3,000 and something that like my family can't afford, then urban planning is a really cool career to go into and to really serve back and help your community and come back and, you will be that advocate for your community. And then we have social services. So one career within social services is becoming a social and community service manager. So what they do is they work directly with specific populations. They help identify problems or gaps within current services for certain populations. They also do research and create programs to address certain issues. They create grant proposals to, get free money to help certain populations. So some examples of different populations that social and community service managers work with are homeless, youth, elders, folks who have alcohol or drug abuse, immigrants, or ex-offenders who have been incarcerated previously. And so if you're someone who's really passionate about maybe one of these different populations that you want to work with, you might consider becoming a social and community service manager and either maybe coming up with your own organization or just managing a current organization. So in order to become a social and community service manager, you at minimum required to have a bachelor's degree. However, a master's is preferred, and you make about $67,000 a year. Next up, we have a social worker. So essentially what social workers do is they help solve people's problems and help them cope with certain problems that they might have in their lives. So different settings that they work in can be mental health clinics, schools, child welfare, human service agencies, hospitals, settlement houses, community development corporations, just to name a few. And they pretty much help all people within these different settings find resources that will help them with their quality of life. And to become a social worker, you do have to have a master's degree and 2 years of a post-master's clinical experience, and you also do need to be licensed. And they make about $71,000 a year, and that is specifically. So I'm going to go ahead and show you a video that I really, really liked. And he does like a spoken word. It's a TED Talk, but it's pretty much just a spoken word. He is a social worker as well as an activist.
When I tell people what I do for a living, they often respond by saying things like, "Bless your soul, that must be difficult." And my all-time favorite, "It's so nice to see someone not working for the money." I'm a social worker. I tend to the wounds of people crucified to circumstance, carry hope and band-aids in my briefcase, share my own scars for street cred. I work with kids who see their probation officers more than their fathers. They wear sagging pants in their parents' mistakes, introduce themselves as accidents waiting to happen. They are a Hollywood casting director's wet dream, tattooed with the temper. Do-rag D-boys, boys in the hood, mi vida loca. They speak in sign language because they have been taught they are voiceless. Marginalization is the chip on their shoulder. It is so heavy they walk with the limp, pass it off as swag. Their fingers, more familiar with pipes than pencils. Eye-smoked clothes paint their worldview the color of devils as they search for God or anyone else they can just look up to. Each one has a story. Emilio wants to change, so he keeps a lucky penny in his pants pocket along with the quarter I gave him to call with whenever he is in need. In the desperation of his 15-year-old eyes, I see more potential than an idea Rivera never manifested on a canvas. He makes the city his, scribes pieces of his soul into windows, not knowing his pain is as transparent as the glass, sprays a masked moniker underneath street lamps, so he always shines brighter than the darkness of his insecurities. He left his self-esteem next to a cigarette bread, but at the bottom of a bottle bought by relatives who see no problem feeding fires. He screams in spontaneous combustion, but believes nobody's listening, so he commits another crime. He likes going to court because there, at least he knows someone is paying attention to his sentences. I am his social worker attempting to make sense of his syntax. He didn't fall through the cracks, they swallowed him. I've seen it happen in broad daylight. Sun turning the other cheek, cowering behind the clouds, concrete quicksand traps youth like Venus fly, homies who claim to have backs, front, offering no help, and so many of our kids are sinking. Emilio asks me for direction, but there's only one way to go from where he is. I show him his heartbeat's his compass. We look at the scars on his psyche. I ask if he's ready to replace them with dirt underneath his fingernails. He asks me how he is supposed to escape the sand. I remind him he cannot ask for one to guide his footsteps if he's not willing to move his feet first. I speak in cliches, talk of butterflies and phoenixes and of hip-hop and so many ugly things that have bloomed into beauty. I speak in truths. I tell him I don't know if things will be okay. I show him statistics are stalking him in prisons, at housewarming parties. I tell him the streets, they don't change, but I know that people do. Hope is not a helium-filled balloon that has slipped from our fingertips. We do not have to watch potential float away. I am a social worker. I work with kids who learn to spell stigma before their first names, but each one is an artist learning to draw their own conclusions. Their pencils are heavy burdens built without erasers on purpose, because sometimes the best thing you can do is not go back. I am a social worker, and no, I don't do it for the money. I do it simply because I still believe in people, and I really hope that you, and you, and you, and you, and you, and all of you still do too.
I saw another TED Talk of a social worker, and she referred to social workers as having being superheroes. And what they do as superheroes is help people find their superpowers. So they really help identify their strengths and really work with that. They help them identify what that is and provide them with resources that can help them to, push forward with any situation that they might be dealing with at the moment and really pursue a better quality of life. So that is the end of the list of different careers that I had within public service. So if any public service career really touched you, or you might be looking into, or you want to, pursue, you might be thinking, what majors could you go into in order to become one of these? So here's a really, really, really long list of majors that you can major in if you do want to go into any of the careers that I listed. So it really depends on what you want to go into. It ranges from, engineering to social work to business to economics, geography, psychology. It's really vast. The field of public services is really large. So there's a whole bunch of different things that you can do within public service to ultimately help your community and, bring back to your community.